Standing as a dark sentinel on the border between Scotland and England was a castle. Its building almost caused war between the two nations. This is the Hermitage Castle. The original builders of a castle here was the de Solis family, Norman knights who were granted lands by David I of Scotland. This castle would pass through many different Scottish families. It would also pass through a few English families, and it would be heavily contested by both nations. Both would own it at some point in their history.
The building of a castle so close to the border with England was seen as an act of aggression by the Scots. The first phase of building by the Solis family in 1240 would have probably been a wooden structure that sits somewhere near where the chapel sits today. The second phase, the stone castle, was built by William Douglas, the first Earl of Douglas. The castle second phase began being built in the mid 14th century, and the castle remained in use until 1603.
The beginnings of a castle was built here in between a break in the Wars of Independence, between the original First War of Independence and the Second War. The stonework you see in front of you was built in the 1360s, and this is the original stone castle. This was the original entrance to the castle. You actually had to climb a set of wooden stairs, cross a wooden drawbridge which would have been pulled up. Once you got across that, there was two other gates that would be lowered into position. It's easy to see it here. This would have been the inner gate here. You see it had been dropped down here. But if you look carefully up onto the first floor, or the next floor up there, which would be the second floor, you can see grooves cut either side of the window that was put in place. And that was where the other door would have been brought up. So not only had you to cross a gap, get through the first possible drawbridge door, then you've got two other wooden doors that you've got to get through to get anywhere inside this castle. In the meantime, the defenders would be attacking you while you tried to do it. This is the Douglas Tower. It probably comprised of 5 floors. From the cellar area there, which was actually the kitchen, and you can still see the fireplace in place there. You would have your first floor where guests would come in, and they reckon the next floor up would probably have been the meeting area for anyone coming to meet the Earl of Douglas, and above it would have been either a meeting or a fancy bedroom and living area. You can see the ornate windows that separates it from the rest of the castle. It's hard to describe how thick the walls are in this castle. As somebody that's visited many a castle, this here is just on a totally different level. It was here in the Douglas Tower that Mary Queen of Scots probably met her injured commander, the Earl of Bothwell, and her future husband.
Southeast corner housed a second deeper well than that in the original castle. Castles used a great deal of water. Well chamber also had a poster and a back entrance to the castle. The door was strengthened a bit. On the second floor was a private chamber.
Here in the corner of the castle we find the prison. The prison had 2 levels. If you were higher status, you had a small window and a latrine. And if you were lower status or higher status and they didn't like you, you were down there in the dark with no light. Here in the well tower, part of the original castle, you can see the various levels. Probably the well would be over in that corner, which unfortunately we don't have access to now. First floor there believed to have been where the serving staff and probably soldiers in garrison would have been fed and spent their leisure time if they had any, and the floor above that would have been the lords or the laird's apartments. One of the quirky features of the Hermitage Castle is the face, the man's face that hides in a window. No one knows the reason for it being there. There's nothing else like it inside the castle. But up in the original part of the castle, which would be second floor, third floor even, there was an ornate face carved into the side of a window. Like I said, they've not found anything else like it here at the Hermitage. It's an oddity that no one can explain.
In Scottish folklore, William de Soulis is said to have had a red cap, a goblin-type creature that would wrought much harm and ruin to the lands around the Hermitage for his master. It was said that he was taken to Nesselrig, a stone circle near the castle, wrapped in lead and boiled to death. But in reality, William de Soulis was imprisoned in Dumbarton Castle, and there he died after his confession of taking part in the conspiracy to overthrow King Robert the Bruce in 1320. The spirit of Mary Queen of Scots is also supposed to roam the halls of the Hermitage Castle.
One of the last additions to the castle was this stone building here. It was actually built to cover the cesspits to stop the smell from the latrines going back up into the castle and offending the lordie's sense of smell. The most notable feature of this castle, apart from the thickness of the walls, is of course these huge arches. And these arches are not there as part of an old doorway that was abandoned. They were actually put there to actually help the defenders build the platform, the fighting platform there, these arches allowed them to bring it round the corners and make it go all the way around the castle. So it was part of the defensive feature of the castle itself. It wasn't an old doorway that got knocked down and replaced. This castle, of course, was not built to be fancy. It was built for strength. It was built to be laid siege to stop invading English armies and halt them in their progress into Scotland. Towards the top there, you can see a row of what looks like windows, but they weren't. They were actually part of a fighting platform. The fighting platform wasn't a permanent feature, but it could be attached to the building in times of siege and at times of need. So you can see just below each of those small sort of windows, which were actually doorways out onto the fighting platform, you can actually see where the stone bits are there to hold wooden plinths that were put into the stone to hold the platform. The platform was then covered to protect the men fighting. So from above, they could lay fire down on whoever decided to attack this castle. We were in the early stages of cannons and handguns in the country, very early. So defenders had the advantage. Once the castle came into the possession of the Earls of Douglas, they'd actually ended up doing away with the temporary fighting platform that was a feature of the castle, and they actually built it slightly higher and put a permanent fighting platform made of stone just slightly above the original part of the castle. Here at the site of the chapel at Hermitage, this was originally the site of the first castle to be built here. It was a wooden structure, and eventually in the 1320s the castle would be moved from here to the more defensible position where the stone castle that we see today was built. It was a simple rectangular chapel that stood here on these lands. Just over at the wall there, you can actually see they've recreated some of the windows that were originally as part of the chapel here.
We hope you enjoyed exploring this castle with us as much as we enjoyed looking around it. And if you find yourself in the borders of Scotland, near England, then take some time to visit this piece of history. If you've made it this far, I'd like to thank you for watching. And please think about liking and subscribing and all the usual things that YouTube like you to do. We'll see you next time on Exploring Alapa and beyond.